Welcome to the Essential Libertarians. I am your host, Green Mays. It has been a minute, but we have an amazing guest here today. He is a great thinker in terms of left wing theory, anarchism. Particularly, I liked his videos on mutualism on Proudhon, and you can check out his two debates with Liquid Zulu as well. I had my own. You can check that one out as well. It is ThoughtBat. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
And it's a pleasure to finally talk to you again. I'm a fan of your videos. Now, for me, I started out just as a punk anarchist. Then I decided, hey, I kind of like my laptop and stuff like this. And then I said, well, why can't I just be? I actually did not like left wing anarchism at that time because it focused so much on, well, we got to care about the environment, community. I'm like, man, I just want to have anarchism where I can have my Bitcoin and my video games and my laptop. And I heard Adam Kokesh talking about anarcho-capitalists are the only anarchists. And I said, well, I guess I'm an ANCAP for a long time until I actually thought about it. I actually looked at Michael Malice's book, met people like Jeremiah Harding, other people. And then most importantly, I looked at Attack the System with Keith Preston, and he called himself a pan-anarchist or an anarcho-pluralist. I saw that there was a lot of different ideas of anarchism. Particularly, I looked into left-wing anarchism, mutualism, anarcho-communism, anarcho-syndicalism, went through everything, and decided that there was a lot of really good ideas that people on the right and even ANCAPs are leaving on the table. So I think we both agree with that.
Yeah, I certainly agree that there's a good amount of golden nuggets across the political spectrum at the bottom. Like even Rothbard comes out with bangers every now and again. And going from Kropotkin up to Rothbard or even Ayn Rand in some cases, you can find these little golden nuggets. And I tend to use those golden nuggets to just develop my own little weird theory. I don't really fit into any category perfectly, so sometimes I go by anarchist without adjectives, but I am more or less close to the mutualist camp.
Yeah.
My journey towards libertarianism or anarchism started fairly similar to yours. I wasn't quite an ANCAP. I was more of a Milton Friedman libertarian, and then I moved over to mutualism. I never went as far as accepting communism or anything like that. I went from Milton Friedman libertarian and then took a diagonal left shift towards something between mutualism and maybe something that you'll call like Friedmanite anarcho-capitalism, something between those two. But given my preference for polycentric law, I don't really have a hard line on what should and shouldn't be a property ethic within a given community. But yeah, I think my favorite anarchist philosophers tend to be Proudhon being the main one, Max Stirner, Benjamin Tucker, and in the modern day, like you got your Kevin Carsons and your Gary Chartiers in the Centre for State Society. I like a lot of their stuff. I'm not affiliated with any of them. I just do my own stuff. But yeah, they're my favorite ones to read. And then sometimes I'll go out into the wilderness and just have a look at what the communists are up to, or look at what the ANCAPs are up to. Most of my time these days is spent talking to ANCAPs and trying to bring them away from this weird Liquid Zulu branch of the philosophy, because I don't really think it's a viable strategy or even worthwhile.
So Liquid Zulu, I appreciate what he does. I like what he does. I did have a good debate with him. And I'm not trying to necessarily pull ANCAPs away from anarcho-capitalism. What I'm trying to say is this. In a world of 8 billion people, 7 billion people, however many people, as governments do their crazy things, make it out alive, there, to me, is zero probability, and which is good, that everybody's going to accept Murray Rothbard as the key player for decentralization. I think there's a good amount who will, and that's fine. But my thing is this. Look, there's not like self-defense, if I told you there's only one way to defend yourself, you'd say no. Well, I can learn martial arts. I can learn firearms. I can also get more physically fit. There's a lot of different, thoughts and streams of that. Like just like anarchism, there's not one thing. I have friends who are Christian anarchists. I have friends who are more environmental, like social ecology wise, not like, Al Gore wise. I have friends who are interested in economics, and maybe even those people approach it differently. So there's not like one thing. And I don't think there's ever going to be one thing. So my prerogative is to say, look, not everybody has the answer to decentralization. It's very diverse. There's a lot of ideas. And let's see which ones work good. Let's see how they work. Let's see how they can work together in different communities. I'm not against an ANCAP society or a liquid Zulu type society as long as I can set up something that I want next to it. And I don't know what that is. So that can be a bunch of different things. To me, there's not like one answer to it. And so I looked at like what kind of anarchism would make sense in the modern day. Now, I actually found that there's even the more reactionary ones that I'm okay with. So I'm okay with somebody who says, I want to be a primitivist. I'm okay with that, provided they don't destroy my tech, they don't smash my laptop while I'm streaming. That's my only thing. Like, definitely, I think there are good things about the actual Zulu tribe, the Hadza, things like that. That's something me and Liquid Zulu debated. So most forms of anarchy I'm okay with, as long as they don't come up and say I'm the dominant anarchy and be like status and say you have to do what I'm doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're talking from a pan-anarchist perspective, where it's pretty close to polycentricity. I think the trouble that Liquid Zulu was to have with that, he was saying that he would define anarcho-capitalism as a adherence to an ethical theory, and the adherence to the ethical theory being like, well, it's a yes or no answer on whether or not this property right is valid or not. And so if anyone's to say, well, I have a property right into my car, objectively speaking, and therefore I should win out in all conflict against it, Liquid Zulu will say, well, you're an ANCAP. Or if you say something like, I'm happy with all these different kinds of anarchist societies about, as long as they respect the NAP, he'll turn around and say, well, we define that as ANCAP, because anarchism is not necessarily about, it doesn't talk too much about how societies are going to look, how they're going to be structured. And I think anarchists are making a mistake if they do that. I think all anarchists across the board are typically happy with different varieties of organizations, so long as they're voluntary. But what they disagree on is the theory of voluntariness itself, or their theory of freedom. And the problem with the theory of freedom is that freedom is a negative concept. It's a freedom from something. So Max Stirner has a great section in his in the chapter of social liberalism, where he's talking about, well, freedom from what? And if you say, well, I want to be free from religion, well, that means, okay, does that mean freedom from the church? Does that mean freedom from religious doctrines in the state at all? I want to be free from the state. I want to be free from foreign nations. I want to be free from capitalism, free from socialism. So all these anarchists who say we are the true fighters of freedom, they're all picking different little things that they want to be free from specifically. And even more broadly with the libertarian movement, who won't say they want to be free from government as such, just free from government injustice. So anarchism and freedom being these negative terms, we're talking about what we don't want to see. We have these different reasons for why we want to get rid of the state. ANCAPs want to get rid of the state because the state interferes with property rights. Communists want to get rid of the state because the state props up capital. And that's two wildly different opinions on what the state does right there. So
Correct.
the different schools of their schools of thought, they're not necessarily saying this is what we want to see, this is what we want to do. It's this is the mode of analysis that we take when we analyze the economy and the political structure of the day. The ANCAP does it through the NAP and natural law. The
Mhm.
anarcho-communists will do it through some dialectical materialism a la Kropotkin, or a la Proudhon, maybe for mutualists.
Okay. Do you think I was talking with Keith Preston about this. His website, Attack the System. He has a lot of different flavors. And he actually said it's kind of a yin and yang thing, which I'll elaborate here. So, if we take away the authoritarian, I don't know if you really regard the political compass as accurate. I have some issues with it. But if we're going to use an imperfect model, I guess we can use it. Some people might agree with it, some people don't. But for the sake of argument, let's just say it's okay. If we go to the left quadrant and the right quadrant, what I see is that a lot of left wing anarchists say they want to abolish all unnecessary or unjustified hierarchies, meaning that I say, oh, I have the ability to command you or to dictate orders to you. And then you turn around and say, well, you don't have any unique qualifications to do that. It's not like you're a master electrician or you're a master podcaster or you're a master at anything. So if you can't justify your hierarchical position, or if it's not needed, let's get rid of it. Now, anarchists on the right will say, well, we can't have hierarchies, but we want to follow the non-aggression principle. And even people on the left will say, okay, hierarchy, someone will make a decision. Like Nestor Makhno was at the head of the hierarchy because he was a good commander. So to me, it's a yin and yang situation where if you have unjustified hierarchies, they will almost inevitably violate the NAP. But if you don't want the NAP violated, you have to make sure that people don't have privileges from authority just because. Thought Slime actually puts it in a good way. Says anarchism basically just says authority cannot justify itself, and if it can't justify itself, a more egalitarian option should be there. So to me, it's yin and yang. If you want a voluntary society that has the NAP, then you're going to have to get rid of these hierarchies that don't matter. And I even think people, when I break it down with left-wing anarchists, I'm not saying get rid of all hierarchies that exist. Like, okay, family unit still exists, a community still exists, and people who are competent will go up to hierarchies, but we want an egalitarian structure of voting when it comes to our community, our workers' council, our tribe. Even if we have to confederate with other communities and do something bigger, then that's fine. But we still want to make a bottom-up structure rather than a top-down structure. So hopefully that's making sense. I see them as working together rather than being opposed. I could even make an argument, a little crazier argument for, I think from a biohacking standpoint, if you want to live your best life, stuff from the primitivists going out and doing stuff in nature and learning about natural stuff is useful, but it's going to have limitations. So why not use the best of modern science? And why not, if, all the natural things fail, use the best in, like, I would even say, like, supplements, very cryogenic freezing, if you're going to die, to say, like, hey, maybe they'll come up with a cure for that. So I know this is sounding crazy, but I can even find parallels, yin and yang, between anarcho transhumanism and primitivism. So that's how I look at it. I look at a lot of these things complementing each other. There's a place for pacifism. There's a place for insurrectionism. There's a place for atheists, like, or if you want to call it egoism, and there is a place for Christian anarchy.
Yeah, I think going back to what you said at the start of that, talking about anarchism as a critique of unjustified hierarchies or a rejection of unjustified hierarchies. And that definition comes to us from Chomsky in his book, short little book, just called Anarchism. And that definition, I think, has caused a horrible amount of confusion amongst the anarchist community. And the reason being is really, if you think about it, that definition means everyone in existence is an anarchist. Nobody believes in supporting what they believe are unjustified hierarchies. Hitler was an anarchist by that definition, only he thought his authority was justified. So we have this problem of what does it actually mean to have an unjust hierarchy? The capitalists, the anarcho-capitalists, will tell you that they're hierarchies, the boss owning the factories and all the rest of it and telling the workers what to do. They'll tell you that's a justified hierarchy. The communists will tell you it's not a justified hierarchy. So it's the standard of justification. Where do we get this idea of justification for a hierarchy from? And I don't think there's a clear answer to that. People might say it's voluntary. Well, what counts as voluntary? Voluntary is one of those words that is just up in the air as per what it means, what its lines are in terms of voluntary. Like, is it voluntary if I'm on an island and someone else owns all the coconuts and they tell me to do this and that before they give me a coconut, otherwise I'll starve? Is that voluntary? Is it?
So I think you can actually figure it out, and here's how I figured it out. Whether it's justified or not means do you have...
I'm still making a choice there, right? So philosophically, voluntarism itself hasn't really been a great word to use to say, well, it's voluntary, therefore it's justified. Because really, we don't know what that means. And so obviously the ANCAPs have come up with a better idea. They said, well, we base it all on property rights, and transgressions against property rights are what makes it involuntary. And that makes it a lot more clearer, I think, to be fair to them, bless them. But I tend to think of anarchism, the definition of anarchism being a set of political theories which they all share this in common. They emphasize individual liberty, and this includes the communists. They emphasize individual liberty to the point where they see the state as unjustified. They declare that the state is unjustified. You wouldn't catch an anarchist saying, I'm against unjustified hierarchies. By the way, the state is justified. I think that will take them out of the definition. So your definition of anarchism has to be tied to your relationship with the state. Do you oppose it or do you support it conceptually? Pardon me.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Yeah, it's some of these things are a little bit vague, and that's the issue, because like ANCAPs will just say, okay, keep it all voluntary. I'm like, okay, but what does that mean? Because it's interesting to me. I have ANCAPs who will say to me that Malay is an ANCAP. Now, whether you think he's doing good stuff economically or not, I'm not going to debate. Some of getting rid of government positions is good. I don't like some of his foreign policy positions, but let's say this: if you're a true ANCAP, you believe the market should do everything, so there shouldn't be a president. And then they'll say nobody deserves to be president. So it's interesting. And there are also, ANCOMs who will say like, oh, we like this leader, we like that leader. Maybe some of them will say like, we like some social democrats like Bernie Sanders or AOC at some point. And I say, well, is that a justified hierarchy? What has Bernie Sanders specifically done that justifies that he can change economic policy to, even if it benefits you, that he can change economic policy for 300 million people? So what I come down and say is this: the only thing that makes something justified is if A, it's inherent in nature, like family, or the other requirement is if you have been given that position through direct democracy and everyone agrees. However, if you don't carry out said stuff, like in a syndicate, then we just have a snap election and remove you. I don't know if it's sufficient. Also, the ANCAP side, like saying, is this voluntary? Voluntary also should encompass that everybody understands what the actual environment is. Because I had problems during the scary beer flu when people are like, yeah, they're private corporations, it's voluntary. I'm like, all these companies are working with the state government or the federal government. So it's not voluntary. And a lot of these things are not voluntary because conditions are very, very vague on what they're doing. So if I say, well, I thought that should be on my podcast, I don't tell you what we're talking about. I just say, come on my podcast. And then I just hit you with a bunch of stuff. You don't know what's going on. I'm like, but he voluntarily clicked the link. So what's the issue? It's voluntary, right? So there are discrepancies in details, and that's where I think it's pertinent to bring those out.
Yeah. So, as I said, there's different standards of justification given, and it seems to me like if we're going to go by this justification definition, we need to give a very clear and precise definition of justification or criterion for justification. I'm not sure there is one, and so I don't define anarchism that way. I define anarchism by what I said earlier, and so I've got a separate reason as to why I oppose the state. And it's not necessarily down to justified or unjustified hierarchies. Like whether or not the state is justified or unjustified seems to be a sketchy area because we don't really know what those words mean properly. However, we can look at what the state attempts to do. And what the state attempts to do is run a country on via democracy, some kind of centralized liberal democracy. Okay, well, think of how that has to work. It's got to work with you voting in an election once every 4 or 5 years, 4 if you're in the United States, 5 if you're in the UK. And you're voting along with, in your case, maybe 150 other million people, 150 million, my case, 36 million people. Right. For this state to get its laws right, it's relying on its electorate to be well informed. Otherwise, they're just voting willy-nilly or voting for tribalistic purposes, and we're not really thinking about what the hell they're voting for. Otherwise, it's not really accurately reflecting the interests of its people, because the people aren't really reflecting on their own interests. So how can a state reflect the interests of people if they don't reflect on their own interests before they vote? And that's an important question liberals need to answer. And David Friedman comes up with a perfect analysis of this. And what he says is this. It says, there's a public goods problem here. The public good being the educated vote. However, my vote has 1/36 millionth of a say on who gets to be the next prime minister. And that's not even factoring in all the first past the post systems and all the rest of it, which makes it even more complicated. It makes my vote even less valuable. And then on the flip side, I've got to take time away from my family, away from my work, away from my hobbies, all the rest of it to research all the manifestos, research the economics, research this and the other, to get an educated vote in the first place. The benefit does not outweigh the cost. And so then we have this problem of rational ignorance. We have a rationally ignorant population in politics. It's in your rational self-interest, economically speaking, to not give a damn about politics that much. For example, in a fairly recent survey, I think it was in the 2010s, 75% of the UK population didn't know who their local MP was. They could tell you who the Prime Minister was, but not the actual person they voted for. 75%. If that's not rational ignorance right there, I don't know what is. So you got people voting for people they don't even know the names of. Never mind all the intricacies of their manifestos. In Wales, we've recently had a big controversy over the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. And that was a policy that was in the Labour manifesto. And we voted for Labour in Wales, and they got into power and they implemented that policy. And most of the country hate it. and they did not know it was going to come. They didn't know because they didn't read the fucking manifesto. So that's a big problem. That is a huge problem. People literally do not know what they vote for, and they do not care until it happens. Now, why is this? Well, I've said before, it's because of the public goods problem. It's because the cost doesn't outweigh the benefits. And, it's like, well, I could. You and I, we're weirdos in this world. We're not normal people, right? We have a particular interest in politics. But John from down the road doesn't. Bert from the other end of the road doesn't. He doesn't give a damn about anarcho-capitalism or mutualism, or he doesn't know who Kropotkin is. He doesn't know political theory, political philosophy. He doesn't care. Doesn't need to care. Fair enough. But I bet he knows the intricacies of his car insurance policies. I bet he knows how that works. I bet he knows about the contracts he has with his bank. I bet he knows about his subscription policies with his Netflix subscription or whatever. I bet he knows all these things. So the idea that David Friedman has, and that's the one that I go with, is this insane idea of how about we marketize law? How about we get rid of the state, which is the monopoly on law, and we marketize it? We have it run in a way where me as a paying customer has a far greater say over the laws that I receive or the legal packages that I get through going through choosing from a menu of different legal regimes. That would economize the legal system. If you economize the legal system, and I'm not sure we can get into all the details tonight, but if you read enough David Friedman, you can map out how a legal system would tend towards efficiency. And there's certain thought experiments you can run. So you can imagine if a legal system declared that theft, petty theft, burglary, is now going to be a crime punishable by death. If you're caught stealing, you're dead. So maybe philosophical people will sit down and say, oh, is this justified? Is this really correct? Is this really right? Legal scholars will be debating if it's constitutional. But an economist will tell you, well, if you increase the penalty for theft to an equal level of that of murder, well, then you've incentivized thieves to kill the victims. And so therefore you have this consequentialist-based, economics-based system of law tending towards an efficient legal system. And there's plenty more to go into that, but that is my reason for opposing the state. That is my approach to all this. It's called polycentricity. It's some people call it another version of anarcho-capitalism, but I don't think so, because I don't think it's tied to capitalism at all, economically speaking. But legally, it's called polycentricity. I think it's a far better way at sorting out the problem of law in a free society than, say, natural law or some other joke ideologies like illegalism.
Yeah, legalism is definitely a wild one there, and we can get into that at another time. What still stood out to me, though, about what you said is there's a lot of people who don't know the political workings of what's going on until things get really bad, which is unfortunate. Things have to go super, super south for people like, oh, wait, who is my MP? What's going on? Why is this happening? Why are things breaking around? Most people, in my opinion, just want to work, have a good life, spend time with their friends and family, and not have to worry about, okay, who's this and who's that. Now, I recognize, or at least my thought pattern is that somebody will always have power because someone has to make a decision, typically multilateral decision, like, hey, what are we going to do in this society? And even if it's done through direct democracy, someone's going to carry that out. That is a form of power. So power will exist. My thing is just bringing it down to the local level or to the level of a trade union. And that's why I took some time and thought about this. I'm still inspired by the CNTFAI and what they've done. I'm inspired by Ron Paul as well. But what's interesting is I'm inspired by individual libertarians on the right, but the CNTFAI were a whole society. And there was the UGT, there was a whole popular front with a lot of ideas, and there was the Carlists, the Franklists, the Nationalists on the other side. So it was really messy there to like sort out all the factions. But the confusion, I think, happens as people get, a little bit up and down about like this group was bad, that group was bad. It's very hard to tell exactly what was going on everywhere. So for me, what I tried to do is say, hey, okay, does syndicalism have any applications in the real world? What I found is syndicalism is being used, but we're in a cyber world now. Like we're in podcasts, we have things like that. I think a lot of people are still stuck in the like factory mode, and that's when these books were written in an industrial age. I don't think it's a good idea, even whether it's anarchist or not, to keep some things are good, like your way of dealing with law. There's some ideas, but the problem that happens is as technology advances, this is one thing that funny enough, Ted Kaczynski put out. As technology advances, these people want to stay conservative like back in the 1950s. That world's not going to come back. I like the 90s, but the 90s are not going to I don't see that happening with like these smartphones and this, and I just don't see that coming back. So I said, okay, if there is a practical application to syndicalism, what would it be? And I still see, and I still think there's potential for digital unions, DAOs, and I'll explain what a DAO is. I didn't know what a DAO was until I started doing crypto reviews, and I still do them, which is if you own, this is usually done with crypto projects, but it could be done with workplaces where you own a stock or you own a token or something like that. You get direct democracy voting rights on how to move that project forward. Now, it is specific to that project. And I still think, to me, that certain industries that do said things, whether it's, you're a computer programmer or whether you're an airline pilot, you're going to have to work with other industries. ANCAPs or Mises calls this social cooperation under the division of labor. How do you get people? That's where wealth comes from. Wealth doesn't exclusively come from hard work. Digging a ditch is hard, but that's not, digging a ditch won't get you a smartphone. Conversely, designing LCDs, even if you're really good at them, won't get you a smartphone. You need someone to design the motherboard, to design the LCD, I can't speak, and also someone who's really, really good at programming the operating system. So there's like 4 or 5 or 6 things you have to specialize in to get this one product. And that goes from smartphones to toasters. So for me, if we're going to have modern syndicalism, I think it should be reoriented to a lot of cyber type of trade unions or cyber type of unions, however that looks like. It should be oriented towards DAOs in the crypto space or even in spaces that are workers' co-ops. And in addition, I still think industries would need to talk to each other. And the last reason I still like syndicalism is this. There's a guy named, since you brought up Friedman, there's a guy named Robert Nozick who wrote Anarchy, Utopia, and the State. And one of his concerns is that in ANCAP you could have you call it defense company or security company that's so good that you do get a monopoly. They're just so good, then they say, hey, we have the most customers. They buy out everyone else. They have a monopoly. And I know, and I get it. There's the argument, well, what if you want a specific type of protection, stuff like that. But monopolies sometimes exist, like Comcast, the internet I'm using now, Xfinity kind of has a monopoly here, kind of. Like you can get Verizon, but it's prohibitively expensive. So I think, to me, syndicalism in and of itself is a good end goal. It doesn't have to go to ANCOM, Stan, although it can. but it's a good, if you want to call it a bulwark against anarcho-capitalism, I think that's a good idea. And ANCAP should be opposed to it because it's a form of competition. They say they want competition. Well, to me, competition isn't just other ANCAPs or agorists. It can also be other leftists or other leftist creations in a decentralized thing. And they both oppose fiat currency. They're both skeptical of the state, and they're both skeptical of highly centralized powers. So those would be my four main ideas on how you can take syndicalism and translate it into a workable form in the modern world. You can call it cyber syndicalism or modern syndicalism, but this is what I think is a good idea, as opposed to just saying, hey, the CNT FAI was awesome, which I think they were good at their historical time. Let's redo that. Say, well, the world's changed. You don't want to, show up to send documents with a fax machine any more than you want to retry that. But they had relatively good success. Orwell picked up on that, which is funny because conservatives love Orwell until I tell them what he said about the CNT FAI. So to me, I think there is potential for Cindy's to be in their own, if you want to call it, trade union, worker union society next to and mutualist stand or mutualist society, or be part of a mutualist society. And I think what will happen is, if you got rid of the state today, some people who just care about their jobs and don't necessarily agree with Rothbard, which we don't agree with everything Rothbard says. So there's two people here. I could say like, hey, thought back, you're good at this, I'm good at this. Let's form a syndicate. And you could still mainly go off of your social ideas from Proudhon, like the Golden Rule, like mutualism and stuff like that. Do those things make sense? Yeah. Am I wrong? Did you want to
Yeah,
pick
so far it's making sense. It seems to me like from what you've said about the cyber syndicates, it seems to me like very similar to how I'd talk about a federation or a mutual aid society. My question, I suppose, would be how much of a role do you think trade unions themselves would be playing in such a development? Like, because there's going to be different kinds of syndicates, there's different kinds of associations we can create, which perform different functions simultaneously. You can have organizations which specialize ideologically, such as federations, anarcho-federations, and what they do is maybe the ones that exist today are dated, but they could adapt along the lines of what you have just been telling me there about, adopting to the cyber world. But what they do is that they pretty much decide on their stances on certain political positions, and they will help distribute resources to different areas, different camps, different organizations. That may be unions, they might fund unions, they might give support to unions, they might distribute food to people who need it, they might try and build homes for the homeless, blah, blah, blah. They get involved in different community activities. So that's a federation. Then you've got things like a party. Maybe there's an anarchist party. Those things do exist. Sounds funny, but they do. Where they try and form a political movement and interact with the state via electoralism. Or there's a union which is more to do with the workplace, more to do with the working class, organizing for a common goal, and that common goal being revolving around collective bargaining. So I'm sort of asking you, what is the role? Because when I hear syndicalism or cyber syndicalism, my brain does go to the CNT. It does go to the elevation of the unions as being the spearhead of an ideological movement. And the reason why that's giving me alarm bells more than anything is because there's a very, very convincing piece of theory out there set by Enrico Malatesta talking about how unions just internally are not good devices, not good vehicles for spearheading movements. And I'll have to repeat myself because I did talk about this earlier in backstage, but But suffer through it for your audience. The union is set up mainly to collectively bargain. A more effective union has more members because it's more people taking part in that collective bargaining process. If a union goes on strike and the more workers go on strike, the more effective that strike is, the better the position of the union in negotiating. So straight away, you've got an incentive to recruit as many workers as you can. If you say things like, we are ideologically committed to anarchism, then you've reduced your population of workers interested in your union down to 4, maybe in your given area, as opposed to the 4,000 it could have been. So unions are incentivized not to be ideologically driven. They're incentivized to be purely collective bargaining units which attract as many workers as possible. A radical union is shutting itself off to the fringe and allowing a less radical, more moderate union or less political union to just suck up all the workers, because obviously the working class aren't just anarchists. They're communists, they're liberals, they're conservatives, many of them. And this was the case in the CNT-FAI as well. The CNT, a lot of people seem to think that the CNT was only anarchists, and that is definitely not true. The CNT was mostly anarchists, that is true, but there was a lot of communists in there, there was a lot of liberals, and there was a lot of conservatives as well, people with conservative beliefs. Not many people know about that, but there's a small minority. But the CNT isn't just a CNT, it's a CNT-FAI. And what's the FAI? It's the Federation of Anarchists in Iberia, the Iberian Anarchist Federation. The CNT was pretty much taken over by this federation, this ideologically driven organization, and that's caused a lot of splits in the CNT, a lot of splinter groups. You had the Syndicalist Party coming away from the CNT. You had distancing from the CNT from the PALM, who was the organization that George Orwell was actually involved in. He wasn't in the CNT, he was in the POUM, which is more Marxist, actually. And then there was the UGT, as you mentioned earlier. They kind of drifted away from the CNT because of the, ironically, iron fist of the FAI over the trade union, trying to keep it in line with anarchist principles because it was deviating so much. And there's another trade union in France. For the life of me, I can't think of what it was called. I think it was the CGT, a big union in France. And that has had political shift after political shift. It went from anarchist to Marxist-Leninist, and now more towards liberalism. So unions are quite turbulent in terms of their political their political driving, because of their incentive structure. They need to attract the most workers, and they have to reflect those workers' ideologies. If the workers' opinions change, so do the unions. Federations are good at saying, well, we only recruit people based on their ideology and their ideological commitment, so they can stay anarchists for hundreds of years, and they only get bigger and smaller, along with the anarchist population in that area. So my question then would be, how big of a role do you really think unions can have in spearheading any major movement, a major radical political movement, based on the critique of unions as given by Enrico Malatesta? Because unions are still the same thing, even though we're in a digital age.
Yeah, unions are still the same thing. And a lot of unions I don't like, because then they come out and say, like, hey, they become overtly political and say, like, well, you know, you really should vote for, like, in this case, Biden or Kamala Harris, or, you know, some unions, I'm sure, like, come on, just, you know, vote for Trump, or maybe in your case, Rishi Sunak or Stammer, I think his name is now. You know, definitely not getting a lot of good influence from the union. So Enrico Malatesta, I've only read one of his books, Anarchy. I like a lot of what he says, but he also says that we do not believe in organizations that are set up on assumptions and have no real sympathy for members. So concessions and assumptions and have no real sympathy for members. So I think we take Malatesta's principle. I also think we take it from the bottom up, from what Roger said, in the place of the state with its lifeless machinery and bureaucratic institutions. Anarchists desire a federation which will assert its or do its business by mutual aid and free contract. So, what I think you do first is you set up the federation. So, you have that as the, I guess, if you want to call it the bottom up structure. So, you have the FAI first, or you have some type of local, government, tribe, whatever it is first. ANCAP, STAN, agorist, an agorist society, even something that's a mixture of something. With people who are going to have different beliefs. People have conservative beliefs. People have liberal beliefs. What I think the best thing to do is decentralize society first, then you set up unions and see how that works. I get that unions, unfortunately, do have the thing of like we have to get the most members and we have to compete with other people. I do see them as kind of a good, if you want to call them, I see them as a good way to, especially in a decentralized society, to counter not central power, but to counter corruption from an ANCOM or from a ANCAP or another type of society. So, and ANCAPs won't like me saying this. I'm friends with ANCAPs. I'm in the Mises Caucus. I like Austrian economics, but we're human. So there's nothing to say, hey, someone in an ANCAP society can get extremely corrupt. And I know what they'll say, well, you have competition, that will root them out. Okay, well, two things. Maybe competition in the free market, we're human. It's not a perfect solution for everything. And two, I think competition in the free market also constitutes syndicates. Now, and if we go to anarcho-communists, there unfortunately is a tendency, even though Malatesta is good, I see a tendency for some ANCOMs, especially when things don't necessarily favor their community or something just doesn't work. There is a tendency to go a little bit of the word, you want to call it state capitalism, tanky, or authoritarian communist, or go to the where these Marxist ideas are still there. To me, syndicates are also a way to counter that. So I think syndicates are a good method of decentralized competition, to me, for corruption that happens within anarchist societies. Also, they're a good position of competition against anarcho-capitalism and against Marxism. And I also see that as a prevailing thing, even though, yes, they don't have the best incentive structure in that way of just recruiting people. But if most of your society is anarchists, or most of your society is decentralized, maybe it takes that problem out. There's still the fact of that, aside from the political thing, to get anything that we're using now, this mug, someone who makes ceramic has to talk to somebody maybe who paints, and someone who paints is going, and these are whole organizations, not just individual dudes. Someone who paints has to talk to someone maybe who does some low-level construction. And I said, well, that's also an alternative way to do things, especially now in the digital age. You're finding a lot of different things that, need multiple people. Like, I'm good with video. I do stuff on video. I'm comfortable on a camera, but I have friends who are only good at running ads, don't want to show their face, don't want people to know they exist. And I say, fine, I'll team up with you. I would have no problem if we're putting in modern things saying, hey, let's make a small syndicate. This is something you could even set up on Discord, Telegram, and then eventually physical. We have a small syndicate of people who are videographers. You have a syndicate of people who run ads now. You have a syndicate of people who make good, people who work in the crypto industry, people who work in cybersecurity, and we all trade and talk about, hey, well, I want to make this change, or I want to do this change. Just like in the industrial world, you say like, hey, I build bridges. Hey, I, make brick walls. Hey, I do industrial work. Hey, I'm in the fishing industry. Now we all get together and say, hey, is building a bridge, and I'm taking this from a video, is building a bridge a good or bad idea for somebody in the fishing industry? Well, and I think those conversations are still necessary. I don't know if I answered your question, but I try my best here.
You answered my question because you mentioned that a union's going to be a bulwark against both communism and perhaps capitalism. So obviously you're talking about this panarchy situation where you've got different organizations ranging from communism to syndicalism to capitalism, and unions are kind of acting as a third block between these two other blocks. And the thing with unions is, it's going to sound anti-union of me to say this, but unions are by no means good things to have in a society now. But what I mean by that, it's not that I'm anti-union, not that I'm telling you to not join a union if you're a worker. Definitely join a union, unionize your workplace. In capitalism, do it. But they are not good things to have in society because they are downwind of class conflict. They are necessarily downwind of class conflict because if you have, say, the sort of society that Liquid Zulu wants or Milton Friedman wants, perhaps, you will have a massive power divide between the capitalist and the worker. You'll have workers who want to increase their pay and their better their living conditions, and you want the capitalists who want to save money and make a profit. And then this class conflict, because you haven't got the state anymore to regulate this, will be exacerbated by union activity. Now, what is union activity? It's strike action. It's ceasing production. It's obstruction. It's protest. It's pretty much meant to make things worse for people. So we know what train strikes do. They wreck the train system and people can't go to work, people can't get to the airport, blah, blah, blah. They piss people off. The strike action pisses people off. What we saw under the Labour government during the early 1970s, the winter of discontent, when Labour was very, very lenient with the unions, and the unions did what we in political philosophy call take the piss. They were just striking and striking and striking, knowing that Labour will concede to them, give them more goodies, and the public just got pissed off them. So they voted in Thatcher. Thatcher pretty much eradicated the unions. And that is all downwind of class conflict. The reason why I'm a mutualist is because mutualism retains the market whilst getting rid of class conflict. Like if you're in a cooperative, why would you get in a union? What are you going to strike against? Yourself? You're striking against the boss. Well, in a cooperative, the boss is democratically elected. Cooperatives and mutualism in general solves this class conflict and gets rid of the need for a union in the first place. It gets rid of the need for this destructive, obstructive body which goes around pissing people off and makes people demand some kind of top-down authority to stamp out the unions. Maybe communists do the same. In fact, yeah, they do. Yeah, communists are always crushing unions in China and in the Soviet Union. It's what they do because unions are destructive. And they're meant to be. They're supposed to be. They won't get anything done otherwise. So, but mutualism is much more favorable to me than anarcho-capitalism because it takes away the need for unions in the first place. It takes away class conflict, which spirals off into authoritarianism. Mutualism just seems to harmonize things a lot more, hence mutual. My voice is running out and it's coming to 11 o'clock.
Okay.
But I think we should wrap things up about now, I think.
Okay, yeah, I'll make one more statement and then can bring
Yeah.
you one more say. And I really do appreciate this. Want to have more conversations with you because this is really good. I used to make a joke about mutualism, and since I haven't read Proudhon in depth, maybe I'm wrong, but I always said mutualism was half ANCOM, half ANCAP. But if I understand what Proudhon is saying have he says property stuff, but I look at what he means. He's like, that's what the aristocracy is doing. So it's a different time. This is like still when you had feudalism. So I think Proudhon would be saying, okay, own everything you want, personal property wise, but your workplace is going to be a workers' co-op or a workers' association. So that's where like I get the idea of mutualism being half and half. I would say this. Um, Businesses take on different type of incentive structures. There's not one, and if the state doesn't exist, still would. I don't think everything. I don't think every business would be a co-op. I'm not against co-ops. Like my friend was talking to me about something called Mondragon today, or like different types of businesses. I think people would structure businesses differently, whether or not you have a state, and there's still going to be ANCAPs who say like, hey, I want to run this big corporation. There'll be agorists maybe who say, well, I don't like that, but I want to have a small mom and pop shop. And where I still see anarcho-syndicalism is panarchy will probably be the thing because we all have different ideas. And I still see a usage for that there because unless you make everything a co-op, which I don't even see happening even if every government falls tomorrow, still think there will be um, different types of businesses and incentive structures in those businesses. And that will lead the way for also different ways to prevent corruption in them. But yeah, another reason I did emphasize with syndicalism is that anarcho-capitalists and Marxists alike are always trying to smash them, like the CCP or these parties. And one thing that actually got me to like the CNTFAI was that for a long time, ANCAP said it was bad. Marxists said it was bad. Oh, what have you guys accomplished? More than a community garden and a lawnmower. Ha ha ha. And other forms of anarchism say it was bad. And then statists say it's bad. I said, well, if everybody's attacking them, but they're doing something revolutionary here, I still want to be part of it. And hearing Chomsky and Rudolph Rocker talk about it, not gonna lie, I'm still emotionally inspired by syndicalism, and I still see a practical usage for it. Even though I think there's room for mutualist societies as well, or purely ANCAP societies, or even Hoppian societies. So I'll stop it there and let you get final thoughts and call it a day.
Yeah. So, final thoughts wise, I just give a reminder that anarchism is more the different schools of anarchism, like mutualism, communism. They're more about your analyses, and the analyses do lead you to different conclusions. I'm not necessarily saying make everything a cooperative. What I am saying is I'm in line with the cooperative sector. I'm in favor of the cooperative sector and its expansion as far as it can possibly go. Not quite the same as make everything a cooperative. The main takeaway from Proudhon with property as theft and also property as liberty, as you said later, what Proudhon's getting at is that there's a contradictory relationship between property and liberty. And when I said that to Zulu, who went, well, what the hell are you talking about? And I'll explain it. Property, on the one hand, is necessary for liberty, right? So you think about it, you own your house, you can do what you want, people can't tell you what you can and can't do in your house. Great, cool. You own a factory now. Okay, well, yeah, you own the factory, you make all the decisions. Oh, but wait, there's people also in that factory, and there's people following your orders about what to do. They're not free in that factory. They don't have free speech in that factory. They don't have bodily autonomy in that factory. They don't have control over when they can go to the toilet, for example. There's lots and lots of freedoms that they don't have in the factory because property rights often trump that. So there's this contradictory relationship with property and liberty. In some cases, it augments it, and in other cases, it diminishes it. And so the whole goal of mutualism is to expand the mutual sector or the cooperative sector so that property and power that comes with property is more horizontal and equalized. And that's fairly similar to the syndicalists' goal, except our emphasis is more to do with markets as well. We like the idea of market competition alongside this horizontal democracy within these structures. But we emphasize the use of the market as well. But that's pretty much all I have to say. Thank you for having me on. And if there's anything else you want to discuss further, feel free to get in touch with me.
Yeah, no, I definitely enjoyed your discussion, and I think you have a really good rational approach to this. And also, it's difficult to find good mutualists who really understand Proudhon's theory, or just make jokes with my Kevin. I think is watching this. I always joke with him, "Hey, you're half and half. What are you today? Are you closing deals, or are you, planting alfalfa sprouts with the comrades?" Kind of like, hey, it's half and half. But probably have to look at Proudhon at some point so I can really understand it.
He's a complicated read.
Okay.
He's a very difficult read because he's all over the place and he changes his terminology over time.
So did Rothbard, and so does Chomsky, and so does Rocker too. That's the funny thing.
There you go. They all do. They're all a bunch of bastards.
Yeah. Like even Bakunin kind of was, there were parts where I found like he was inconsistent. All of them do. Like to me, all good thinkers. Bookchin literally went from, I think Bookchin went from Marxist to anarchist to lifestyle, to criticizing lifestyle anarchist to like syndicalist, and then he went to communalist, which is kind of a form of minarchy, or people call it city-statism. A lot of these thinkers, Rothbard went from, hey, the leftists are cool, let's fight together, to, hey, unleash the cops. Like they're little Rothbardians are like, yeah, I like seeing cops pushing them homeless. But I'm like, you guys are anarchists and you like seeing cops pushing homeless people around. I don't think that is the best. You're pushing the anarcho-capitalist stereotype of like the evil dude with the cigar, which isn't good. So that being said, Thought Bad, I would love to have you back on. Maybe we can actually have since you told Zulu Rothbard was better than Proudhon, maybe I'll have a Rudolf Rocker, Proudhon type bait. I just have to look in Proudhon a little bit more, and then I'll contact you back. We can have a moderator and maybe do a little debate and do more stuff.
No, why not? Yeah, if you think of anything, get in touch.
Yeah. Oh well, hey, you know how it's
always Proudhon's private writings too much.
Can we have a Proudhon syndicate?
A Proudhon syndicate? Yeah, there's plenty of unions based on Proudhonian ideas.
So there you go. See, we're winning already.
There's plenty more cooperatives out there, though. Anyway.
All right.
See you later, Bob.
All right. You have a good one. Again, I'm your host, Kareem, with the Essential Libertarians, giving you the tools for self-governance. Check out ThoughtBat's YouTube channel. Check out his work and his debate with two debates with Liquid Zulu. And we'll be back with another syndicalism versus mutualism. Let's go.
Ta-da.